Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's begin. Welcome to Streamlining Permit Processing for Electric Vehicle Charging Stations, a webinar brought to you by CALeVIP and SANDAG. For introductions, we have two moderators today and several great presenters. My name is Susan Friedman, and I'm with the San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG, and I manage our EV programs at the agency. As well with me is Kevin Wood with the Center for Sustainable Energy, who is an EV expert and been working in the field for a long time. Our presenters are Kylan Rathjen with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GO-Biz, Ida Clare with the Division of State Architect, Mo Zarabi with the County of San Diego, and Randy Shimka with San Diego Gas and Electric. Before we get started, I want to read off for everyone, in case some folks are dialing in, a few logistics. Participants can submit questions in the chat box anytime during the presentation. Due to high traffic, you may experience technical difficulties during this presentation. We apologize for potential delays or compromised presentation quality. If you miss any part of this presentation or have questions, please contact us at calevip@energycenter.org. And this presentation will be sent out to all the attendees on 10/21 or tomorrow. A little bit on the agenda. I'm going to first highlight, and so will Kevin, CALeVIP, and some of the SANDAG resources being brought to the project. And then we will go right into hearing from GO-Biz on the EV permit streamlining, followed by the Division of State Architect on accessibility regulations. Then we have the County of San Diego sharing some permitting best practices, as well as SDGRE on utility coordination, followed by a Q&A session. So I think we can move forward. This is a little bit about that first part on CALeVIP and SANDAG's resources. So for a little bit of background on why SANDAG's involved and wanted to do this EV permitting streamlining workshop, SANDAG has a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy, and when we adopted our last one, it included a measure to fund public EV infrastructure, and it called for us to do this for 30 years. So CALeVIP, in our partnering with the Air District and the Energy Commission, is the first stage of that. We want to support state goals, and for right now, CALeVIP, we're putting in almost $5 million in the first 3 years, and there'll be more money to come after that. But some things we wanted to add to the EV infrastructure rebates was additional technical assistance, an EV expert, which Kevin Wood is a big part of, also supporting workforce development training for electricians and electrical contractors. And then today's webinar, which is on permit streamlining assistance to help out our local governments as you start to field more permits for EV charger installations, and share some best practices and some tools that are available from the panelists. With this, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Wood.
Great, thank you, Susan. So we are very pleased to be sharing this webinar today, as well as bringing the CALeVIP project to San Diego. So CALeVIP is the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project, which offers rebates for the purchase of and installation of both level 2 and DC fast charging to publicly accessible sites throughout California. For the San Diego project, there's rebates of up to $80,000 per DC fast charger and up to $7,500 per level 2 connector. The highest rebate levels are for those properties, including multi-unit dwellings, disadvantaged, and low-income communities. So the CALeVIP program is instituted as a series of sub-regional workshops. So we've already launched incentive projects in Southern California, Sacramento, Northern California, the Central Valley, and the Central Coast area. And the San Diego County project is the next project to launch, coming up just next week on October 27th, with about $21.7 million in funding. That includes both state funding from the California Energy Commission, as well as funding from our partners at SANDAG and the San Diego Air Pollution Control District. In all, with the Peninsula Silicon Valley project launching later this year, this project will have allocated more than $155 million to EV charging in California. And that's on top of other utility programs, which we'll hear from SDGRE later, and other investments happening in California. So that's a big reason why permit streamlining is important, because there's such an effort behind getting electric vehicles and infrastructure deployed. And so one of the things, as Susan alluded to, that we offer as part of this project, it's not just about getting money out the door, but we want to provide technical assistance and permit streamlining support. So through our EV expert service, we provide EV charging guidance to multi-unit dwellings and small business sites focused on disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, rural areas, and tribal areas. So for anyone representing these properties, we can provide direct one-on-one support to help them plan their charging project. And on the permitting side, we do offer one-on-one meetings with San Diego County authorities having jurisdictions. This includes a compliance scorecard review, and we'll hear about the compliance scorecard from Kylan, as well as sample ordinances to become eligible and materials for the checklist that's required under the state permit streamlining law. So for more information, you can contact on the technical assistance projects. You can email project staff at evexpert@energycenter.org or use our toll-free 866 number. There's also information on calevip.org/technical assistance to request technical assistance. And there's general project information you can find on calevip.org and then navigating to the San Diego County Incentive Project. And with that introduction, we'd like to go to the next slide and transition over to Kylan Rathjen at the Governor's Office. Take it away, Kylan.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all here today. Great. So yeah, as Kevin said, my name's Kylan Rathjen. I work for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. So our office in Sacramento leads the state's economic development programs and pushes. And one big piece of that is EV charging stations. So as you all know, this is a big priority area for the state. And we want to ensure that the process of getting these chargers installed is as quick as possible. It helps applicants, but it also helps cities and helps us achieve our climate goals. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Yeah, so first we just wanted to speak about the impacts of COVID. Our office works frequently with local governments, and we're very aware about how challenging this time has been for cities and counties. Folks have to redeploy their department staff to other areas that may be needing support. I know with the fires, this has been a very challenging time for everyone, and our office is very aware of that and have been giving folks space and extra resources in order to support their permit streamlining efforts. But as we're getting used to this new reality, as challenging as it is, we view this at GO-Biz as an opportunity to help rebuild our economy. There's numerous shovel-ready charging station projects across California that are essentially just waiting on permits. So if we can figure out how to get these permits approved faster, we can put folks back to work, do so in a safe manner, and also by permit streamlining, you'll be saving time at the city and county level so that you can work on other projects. So we really view this as a great opportunity to help meet our climate goals and revitalize the state. But yeah, very aware of COVID, and our office is more than happy to provide any guidance and resources, and certainly hope all of your friends and family are doing okay in these challenging times. Additionally, in that regard, GO-Biz has put together a comprehensive list of state and federal resources on business assistance through our website. So if you or your constituents need any information on that, highly encourage you to get in touch with us or go to our website. Yeah, so what are we talking about here today? So EV charging stations come in a few flavors. So for starters, you have a level 1 charging station. These can typically be plugged into your typical outlet, and you'll get about 5 miles of charge per hour. Then you have your level 2 charging stations. You can install these in your home, or they're publicly accessible throughout California. You'll get about 50 miles of charge per hour on these. And then we have DC fast chargers, your Tesla superchargers, your level 3. These are your fast powered chargers that move power into your vehicle much more quickly. And you'll get about 3 to 20 miles per minute on these chargers. We want to ensure that on all kinds of permitting for these charging stations, it's a easy process, whether it's the high power chargers or you have mini level 2. we'd love to ensure that it's an easy process for applicants and for cities. Great. So as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this slide, California's done a lot of great strides in reducing our emissions over the past few years and decades. Particularly in the power sector, we've been able to bring on quite a few renewable technologies, but transportation is a very tough nut to crack. It's despite how much we've been spending, the transportation emissions, we haven't seen the declines we've wanted to. So zero emission vehicles play a critical role in achieving that aim of reducing our emissions as a state and bringing down this top transportation emissions line. Yeah, so California has a series of ambitious zero emission vehicle goals. I'm excited to announce that there is a new goal I added to this list, which is ensuring that all light duty car sales will be zero emission by 2035. Also medium and heavy duty by 2045. In addition, carbon neutral as a state, and we would have 1.5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2025, and then 5 million zero emission vehicles on the road by 2030. 250,000 charging stations by 2025, and then 200 hydrogen refueling stations by 2025. So our office, beyond just working on charging stations, we also do a lot of work on permit streamlining with hydrogen stations. So if anyone has questions about hydrogen stations, we have another guidebook on that, and I'm happy to get you in touch with the appropriate folks at our office to give you information on how to get hydrogen set up in your community. Yeah, so zero emission vehicles need to be a part of the solution, but they need to be a part of the solution faster. And that's where permit streamlining comes in. The second largest concern about prospective EV buyers or folks thinking about leasing them is the low charging station availability. And permitting costs make that much more challenging of a problem to fix, because in California, it's more expensive and typically there are more delays with getting these stations installed. Despite that, California has the most ambitious and progressive permit streamlining law on the books for charging stations. It's called AB 1236, and it was passed in 2015. And we found that we've had some really wonderful cases in certain cities and counties in California, but the law has been implemented unevenly across the state. And there were also dates for compliance with this law. If you had a smaller city, by 2017, September 30th, you needed to comply with the law by passing an ordinance. And for larger cities, the compliance date was September 30th, 2016. So we've done an extensive analysis on this point and happy to share information later on in the presentation. So yeah, going back, why is this important? So it creates new jobs, puts folks back to work. It ensures that the air quality improves in your community. And importantly is that this saves city and counties staff time. With COVID going on, folks have been very busy. There's certainly projects still happening across the state, and with budget shortfalls, folks are doing more work than ever. And that's why permit streamlining is a great tool to reduce the burden on city and county staff. So with these three ideas, we really see this as a win-win across the board. It takes a little bit of time to get the permit streamlining set up, but once it is, it ensures that the process saves time in the long term. Additionally, the Rocky Mountain Institute has found that charging stations, to install the station itself, costs 3 to 5 times more than the charger. So that's a much higher ratio in the United States compared to other countries. So we're really trying to figure out how to bring that installation cost down. And the same report indicated that the greatest possibility for cost reduction with charging stations is that soft cost. It's the permitting. So permitting, if we can figure that out, we can really reduce the cost of these chargers and therefore electrify our entire transportation sector for all the goals that the state has. And also, just to put a fine point on this, Electrify America, one of the state's leading charging station companies, has found that the average permitting time in California is 70% larger, and in California it's 22% more expensive to build. And that also stations need to be redesigned 30% more frequently. And this is compared to the national average of charging stations. So in this regards, based off of one of the previous executive orders, our office has put together the Electric Vehicle Charging Station Permitting Guidebook. So this is a great document to help your local governments prepare for these zero emission vehicles, to get permit streamlining setup, but also learn about all of the best practices that cities have employed that you can employ in your jurisdiction. It's also helpful for charging station developers to read and is a great resource. So I won't go into too many details here today, but essentially the key sections of the guidebook are planning and site selection. We also talk about permitting, which is why I'm here today, which I'll go into more detail about. We also speak about accessibility, and Ida from the Division of State Architect is here, so she can go into more detail about that. We also talk about connecting to the grid, and we have the folks from utility here to speak about that later in my presentation, or in the presentation. And then finally, construction and commissioning and operation. So it's a great resource, and I'm sure we'll send that out to folks later on after the presentation. Yeah, so permitting is really the heart and soul of our guidebook and why I'm here to speak with you all here today. So AB 1236 lays out a specific process for streamlining. So essentially, your city or county must pass an ordinance, which we have numerous examples of on our website, and also CALeVIP has a model ordinance that you can adopt. And this says you're going to streamline it, has specific requirements called out in the law. And then you would develop an online checklist, which has all of the necessary requirements that a city or county might have from an applicant. So it's all written out so that the applicant can easily provide that information to you. Additionally, there would be an online application so that everything could be done online. And then through that, you would have a permit submittal that would happen fairly quickly. And then the review would be funneled through the building department and would be limited only to health and safety concerns. Aesthetics and larger planning concerns should not be a part of the review process. But if there's any issues with the permit, there would be one complete deficiency notice. So all problems would be bundled together so that the applicant can respond to them all at once. Then you would have resubmittal and then a speedy approval to build. So that's the process called out in the law. And what we'd love to see cities do to make the charging station companies get their projects installed as quickly as possible. Yeah, so our office has surveyed local governments and the industry and have found that there's best practices for installing charging stations to have a timeline set up. So essentially, this is not required by law, but it's a best practice we've seen to make your community particularly friendly to EVs and get these jobs in your communities as quickly as possible. So for starters, from application submittal to complete response, ideally that would happen in 1 day, but a best practice would be 5 days. From complete package to approval to build, so this is the core of the permitting, that would be ideally the same day and over the counter, but within 15 days is considered a best practice. Additionally, you have construction completion notice to inspection. Again, same day is optimal, but 5 days is within a best practice. So again, this is not required by law, but we certainly love to see cities employing these measures and have examples in our guidebook of what cities and counties have done. Yeah, so how this all comes together, the living version of our guidebook is our electric vehicle charging station permit streamlining map. So our office has conducted an analysis and reviewed every city and county in California. So a lot of jurisdictions, it's a big state. And we have found that certain cities have complied with AB 1236 and others are in process or have not started just yet. So again, this map is just to provide, show who's complying with the law and help others that maybe need a little bit more help. It's certainly a useful tool just to get the entire state green as soon as we can. So again, yeah, green is fully streamlined, yellow is partially streamlined, and red is not streamlined. Yeah, so what you can do is that you can click on any city and county on the map and find out what if the city has passed an ordinance, if they have a checklist, if the ordinance is meeting all the requirements of the law. So all that's available online. And I also have a photo of San Diego County here, which is doing better than many parts of California, but you still see a smattering of red and yellow. So we view this as an opportunity for all of us to work together to get green as soon as we can to just get San Diego ready for as many EVs as we can get. So what are some common problems that we hear from charging station companies? So one big issue is that aesthetics are often seen as a hindrance to getting these stations installed. You want to ensure that you have a colored ballard that matches a certain, jurisdiction's, favorite color or some other concern that they might have, requiring public art be installed with a charging station, ensuring that there's additional landscaping that needs to be installed. Additionally, you'll have zoning concerns come up. And again, it should just be health and safety limited. So zoning should not be an issue. Parking counts represent a problem as well. Many jurisdictions find because, does a charging station count as a parking spot? AB 1236 stipulates that yes, all charging spots count as parking spots. So that should not be a concern. And in addition, many jurisdictions might not have electronic signature, so you can't submit online. So these 4 issues are all deemed not AB 1236 compliant. So this is not should not be happening, and we try to communicate with folks that there's a law that prevents this from happening. There's different ADA interpretations of the accessibility regulation of charging stations, and Ida will speak about that, but different jurisdictions have different interpretations of the law, which can make things challenging for certain charging station companies. Additionally, there's lack of awareness of AB 1236. That's the biggest issue. Possibly a lot of the folks on the phone today haven't heard about the law, but that's why we're doing this outreach to make sure everyone's aware of this law that's been on the books for 5 years now. Yeah, so what are we looking at in terms of our grading of getting to green on the map? So for starters, you need a streamlining ordinance. There's many examples on our website. And again, CALBO has created a model ordinance that you can use. Secondly, that there would be a permitting checklist. And this includes commercial, residential projects, level 2, DC fast chargers, any kind of project that would have all of the requirements written down so applicants can quickly respond to that. Third, that there would be an administrative approval process of a charging station. And yeah, it's again funneled through the building department. Fourth is that there would be limited health and safety review. This is really critical piece of AB 1236. Again, it's just health and safety focused. Fifth is that electronic signatures are accepted so that folks don't need to go down to City Hall to get their permit. This is particularly important during a time of COVID where we don't want folks interacting if we don't have to. Sixth is that a charging station permit is not subject to association approval. So like a condo board couldn't veto a project, that would not be AB 1236 compliant. Seventh is that there would be, again, one deficiency notice so that all problems with a project are bundled together and can be responded to at once. And eighth is that there would be a bonus criteria, which is not called out in the law, but having that timeline of having 15 days to respond to an application. That's just deemed a best practice, and you get a bonus point on our map if you adopt some kind of timeline. Yeah. So how is the state doing in terms of compliance? In terms of the hard numbers. So today we found that 109 jurisdictions have streamlined. 160 are streamlining in progress, means that they've adopted checklists, but not an ordinance, or they have parts of the law. And the last is that 50% of the state, 271 jurisdictions have not streamlined. So they haven't gone through the process called out in the law. So we certainly want to get this pie chart all green as soon as we can, because 20% of the jurisdictions have streamlined, which is wonderful. And we have some really great best practices throughout the state. But we want to make sure that everyone's complying with the existing law. Okay, so how to become green on our map, which is why I'm so excited so many of you are on the phone here today. So first and foremost is that you have to pass an ordinance. That's the #1 thing required in the law. And again, there's many examples online, which will essentially say you will streamline your permitting for charging stations. Second, you need to create a permitting checklist, and that, again, many examples online, happy to work through that process with you, and has all the details of what is required. And then we want to make sure that permit streamlining happens behind the counter as well, so that the planning department is removed as much as possible. And again, everything is funneled through the building department, and the review is health and safety focused. So our office has taken on an exciting new initiative in regards to the new executive order, what we're calling the Permitting Olympics. So this is the first time I've spoken about this outside of internal state meetings, but we have an internal goal of getting the entire state streamlined by April 22nd of 2021. Because of the 100% zero emission vehicle goal, we want to make sure the charging stations are going in as quickly as they can, and that we're working towards those objectives. So our website will show progress towards this goal. We will have a counter which will go up as cities streamline. And we're also giving awards essentially to jurisdictions that comply with the law. And then this is through a county process. So if you are a county where 50% of your jurisdictions have streamlined, you would get a bronze medal. If you have 75% of your jurisdiction streamlined, you get a silver medal, and 100% is gold. So no one has gotten gold just yet. So it's certainly a wonderful opportunity for San Diego to go for gold first. So this is a temporary initiative that we're just seeing if we can get this push to get the entire state green or gold by 2021. So it's an exciting new initiative, and our office will provide awards to folks that go above and beyond to get their community streamlined, and really view this as a useful tool to encourage folks to compete and get excited about permit streamlining. Because this is it's not the first topic to come to mind for most folks, but once you boil down the details, like we've done at GO-Biz, permit streamlining is critical to achieving our state goals for zero emission vehicles. Great. So my name's Kylan Rathjen again, also Tyson, who leads our team at GO-Biz. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. I know I've been working with a lot of the folks on the call about their potential streamlining status. I know San Diego County, some of the jurisdictions will become green relatively soon based off my email conversations. But if you need any help getting your city green, please let me know. Happy to help send over model information. I can review ordinances and checklists. So anything you need, we're more than happy to help. Additionally, we have a newsletter called The Plug in the Nozzle, which is your one-stop shop for the governor's office zero emission vehicle information. So just feel free to subscribe to that if interested. So thank you so much. So I'm going to kick things over to Ida for the next presentation, and happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kylan. I am Ida Clara from the Division of the State Architect. I'm the Principal Architect for Accessibility, and I'm also the Acting State Architect. Today I'll be discussing electric vehicle charging station accessibility, which is required for public buildings, public accommodations, commercial facilities, and public housing. Private housing is covered under CalGreen. You can find accessibility regulations for private housing, private multifamily housing in CalGreen, and that's regulated by Department of Housing and Community Development. DSA only regulates public housing, which is by, for, or on behalf of a public entity or as part of a public entity's housing program. All right, so when we're talking about applying EV charging station accessibility for public accommodations, commercial facilities, public housing, and public facilities, there's a step to doing it accurately. First, you need to read applicable definitions in Chapter 2 of the California Building Code prior to applying the scoping and technical requirements. Then you go to the scoping requirements, which are in the Division 2 of Section 11B, and that will tell you how many accessible charging stations you need based on the total number of charging stations you've provided. You apply technical provisions for charging. After that, you apply the technical provisions, which you'll find in 11B 812, Division 8 specifically. And if the project is an alteration, there may be path of travel improvement requirements also applied, which I'll clarify in a little bit. All right, so there are two exceptions to providing accessible electric vehicle charging. One is that if the charging is not available to the general public and it's not intended for use by a designated vehicle or driver, you don't have to provide accessibility. So an example would be electric vehicle charging that is assigned to an employee specifically, dedicated to an employee, or serving private or public fleet vehicles. So it does need to meet both requirements in order for accessibility not to be provided or not to be required. And of course, in public housing facilities, if the charging station is intended for use by an EV owner or an operator at their residence, meaning the space is assigned, then it does not need to be accessible unless, of course, the individual to whom the space is assigned needs an accessible space. All right, so when the regulations were developed and became effective in 2014, I believe, 2016, sorry. There are many electric vehicle charging stations already existing that did not provide accessibility. So when the new regulations came into effect, you were to take into consideration the total number of new and existing electric vehicle charging stations at the site, and then apply the table to determine the number of accessible EVS. So there was no requirement to alter existing stations. There still isn't. It's just that when you're adding new, you do need to take into consideration the entire number of charging stations provided to determine how many accessible need to be provided. And then, of course, the technical provisions apply only to the new and altered. CBC does not require existing charging stations to be altered to meet the new technical requirements. All right, we do have 4 accessible spaces. The van accessible EV space is 12 foot wide by 18 feet long with a 5-foot access aisle. It's very important that you understand for a van accessible EV space, the term van accessible really just describes a space that has a wider access aisle, generally for use of vans. However, when it comes to EV charging, we don't allow the typical van accessible parking space of 9 foot wide with an 8-foot access aisle, because the van accessible space that's 12 foot wide with a 5-foot access aisle actually allows an individual with a disability who drives an electric vehicle to park closer to one side or the other, so that depending on where the charging port is on the vehicle. So you can imagine that in a 12-foot wide space, if the charging port is on the driver's side, they can actually park very close to the access aisle on the passenger side and still have approximately 36 to 48 inches on the side of the driver to get out of the car and be able to access the charger and the charging port if the charging port's on the driver's side. The reason why we do this is California law does not permit individuals in parking in access aisles. And so the increased width gives that flexibility without affecting the access aisle, even if for an individual with a disability who is driving the vehicle, they may not actually even be using the access aisle, because obviously they need the clearance on the left or on the driver's side. So every space starts with at least one van accessible space. Of course, you would look at the table depending on the number that you provide to see if you need more. Subsequent spaces are standard accessible, which are 9 feet wide, 18 feet long with a 5-foot access aisle, and that 5-foot access aisle can be on either side of the car, either on the van or either on the driver or on the passenger side. After that, once you reach about 26 charging spaces, then you will need a ambulatory accessible EV space. And this is about a 10-foot wide space. And they are not reserved for individuals with disabilities, but it does, the increased width provides increased access for individuals with limited or temporary mobility challenges. And the only way you identify them is just it's a wider space. There's no signage or marking on those ambulatory accessible spaces. We do that because we understand that access to charging is critical, especially if you're running low on a charge, and so we do want to increase the offerings without requiring that reservation in making them fully accessible and reserved only for individuals with disabilities. And then, of course, the 4th accessible EV space is a drive-up accessible EV space. This is similar to parking at a fuel pump island, so it's kind of you drive up, you pump, and you drive away. It's not a parking station configuration. When you look at the definition in Chapter 2, that's why we say the definitions in Chapter 11B, in the CBC are important, because when you look at the definition for drive-up accessible EV space in Chapter 2, charging is limited to 30 minutes. All right, so obviously accessible route requirements are in place. You need an accessible route that connects the electric vehicle space, to the charger that serves it. And so those accessible requirements are based on, minimum 36-inch width, obviously, slope provided, accessible slopes, obviously, to access the chargers. The charging stations need to be designed so that routes are not obstructed by cables or other elements. You can imagine that would be very difficult for an individual in a wheelchair to get over a cable. Charging stations that serve a particular building or facility shall be located on an accessible route to an accessible entrance. That means that this is not a path of travel requirement per se. Like I said, I'll get into path of travel later. Anytime you add a charging station to a parking or charging facility, you do need to provide an accessible route to the accessible entrance. It's actually a requirement because they need to have that connectivity. And then, of course, where charging stations do not serve a particular building or facility, charging stations shall be located on an accessible route to an accessible pedestrian entrance of the charging facility. So what do we mean by that? Well, there's a lot of private and public parking lots, especially inside urban areas, that are solely parking facilities, and so providing an accessible route to the public right-of-way or the entrance of the charging facility, say if it's a parking garage, it needs to be provided. All right. The chargers also have accessibility requirements. Those serving accessible spaces, charging cables cannot block the access route. And of course, that may require core storage or overhead access or cord management, I should say, overhead so that they don't block the accessible route. It depends on the design of the electric vehicle charging station facility. And then, of course, a clear floor space is required at the EV chargers so that there is space to operate the interface. Reach range requirements for operable parts. That means point of sale devices, any digital requirements on the screen, and reaching, obviously, of course, the connector. And then while the operable parts on the charger require a 5-pound maximum force, the connectors are not required to meet the 5-pound activating force requirements. And then, of course, there are additional accessibility requirements for point of sale devices, and they need to comply with 11B 812.10.3. All right, so now we're talking about how we identify these charging stations as accessible stations. So it's important to note that installations of 1 to 4 electric vehicle charging stations are open to all. While a van accessible space is provided, it is not required to be identified for exclusive use. So we're providing the space if it's needed. However, understanding that reserving a space when less than 4 or less charging stations are provided, it is restrictive. And so at this time, the van accessible space when less than 4 accessible spaces are, less than 4 charging spaces are provided, does not need to be identified for exclusive use of individuals with disabilities. Once you hit 5 and you provide 5 to 25 spaces, there is one van accessible EV space shall be identified with the international symbol of accessibility and reserved for use, and the standard accessible EV space is not required. So the minute you hit 5 charging stations, you require one van accessible space and one standard accessible space. Usually they share an access aisle, and the standard accessible space will not be reserved, but the van accessible space is reserved. Once you hit an installation of 26 charging stations, then all accessible spaces become reserved. Next slide, please, except for the ambulatory, those remain unreserved. Sorry, next slide, please. All right, I jumped ahead. There you go. Installations of 26 or more charging stations, all required van accessible and all required standard accessible shall be identified with an ISA. The ambulatory are not, and the drive-up are not required to be identified. And if it's not identified with an ISA, it is not reserved for individuals with disabilities. Okay, so we just went through rulemaking. In July of 2020, new amendments were approved for electric vehicle charging stations, which are coming into the CBC supplement for that will be effective July 1st of 2021. The regulations will be publicly released in January. and then they will be available for 6 months before they become fully effective. So as of July 1st, 2021 of next year, you apply the scoping requirements for each combination of charging level and EV connector type integral to the EV charger. So if you have level 2 facilities, they have a unique connector type. You would need to apply the table to the number of level 2 chargers, and then however number of level 3 chargers you have, you would need to apply the table to the number of level 3 charging. That results in having 2 van accessible spaces, one for the level 2, one for the level 3. Also pay attention that level 3 chargers, there are 2 different types that are available, and so you would have to address that as well. Ultimately, you may end up with you will end up with more accessible spaces, but depending on the number provided, they need not all be reserved if less than 4 or less stations are provided for each combination, because you would be applying that the table based on the combination of charging level and connector type. And so we also clarified specific technical requirements that if a parking space and a charging space share an access aisle, you use the parking space markings. Right now, the regulations say that you cannot use parking space markings for identifying electric vehicle charging stations. However, the parking space requirements are in state law, and so if there is an opportunity to share the space, which is allowed, you would use the parking space markings for the accessible parking space, and that would the color of those markings would can be used as long as you don't use them for the electric vehicle charging vehicle space. The access aisle can be used with what we call federal blue. When less than 4 charging spaces, the van accessible charging space can have the access aisle on either side of the vehicle. So that is a new one as well, starting in July. You can provide in a van accessible space, you can actually have the access aisle on either side of the vehicle. Right now, it's only on the driver's side. Sorry, excuse me, on the passenger side. All right, and so here's our slide on path of travel improvements. Remember, the accessible route from the charging station to the entrance of the facility, or the entrance of the entrance of the building, or entrance of the charging facility, is required to be provided. That is not a path of travel improvement. That is part of the project. Path of travel improvements come about when in the building code, when you're making an alteration, you do need to make alterations to other areas of your facility to increase accessibility. And so path of travel improvements, when it's when the parking structure where the vehicle fueling, charging, and parking is a primary function, that would be your parking garages, your parking lots that do not serve a building, like your public parking lots or even private parking lots that offer parking for sale, and that's all, there's no building on the site. Those you would provide path of travel improvements, which would be if restrooms are provided, you would need to make improvements to the restrooms. And that's, you know, signage. That's the extent pretty much of the path of travel improvements. Telephones if they're provided, but that's fewer and far between these days. So then you would need to make those improvements. But if the charging facility serves a building, there are no path of travel improvements required. Remember, an accessible route is still required. That's not a path of travel improvement, but there's no need for you to go into the building and say, make an improvement to a restroom, because parking or the charging facility, the path of travel improvements are not required. All right, and so we do have resources on our webpage. These will be updated for the July 1st, 2021 regulations. Right now, they're still there on our website with the current regulations. We also have a video that provides further guidance on these regulations. I was pretty brief today, but we also address federal resources and what the ADA requires for charging. They are not explicit. They say to apply use parking as a model. That's the reason why California has specific requirements, so that we can ensure accessibility is provided on a consistent manner, especially since in California we're doing significant deployment of charging stations, and that consistency is important, and that's why we have the regulations. We also provide a fact sheet summary, PowerPoint and video, and also responses to some frequently asked questions. I advise you to check our website first, but if there is a question that you still don't have adequately addressed, please reach out to DSA. We have staff ready to answer your questions in order to facilitate providing accessibility to charging stations. And I will take your questions later. So I will now pass it on to, I believe it's Mo, correct?
So much, Ida. My name is Mo Zarabi, and I'm with the County of San Diego. I'm a land use environmental planner, and I help manage some of the renewable energy projects that we manage. It's a pleasure for us to be here. I wanted to thank CALeVIP and SANDAG for putting together such a wonderful presentation and a resource for us to be able to share some of our experiences. Today, we'll basically give you a brief overview of what the county has done in terms of our initiatives to streamline our permitting process, give you a brief background and the legislative framework in achieving the streamlining, and basically what we had to do to get the elusive green status on that map, along some of the lessons learned. The county has had a long history of supporting renewable energy projects overall. Starting in 2001, our board took action to waive some of the fees associated with solar and solar PV and water heaters. We also have the fortunate circumstance of being able to be provided by a very robust online permitting process and automated platforms. We're able to use that to streamline the permitting and put the plan checks online in 2013 and expand non-permitted instant permit projects online as well for the things that didn't have plan checks, where the applicant goes online and basically at the end of the submittal process, the permit is instantaneously issued. That's what we did for panel upgrades, and that was largely what was used for EV charge stations back at the time. Our board took action in adopting a streamlined permitting and compliance to AB 1236 in 2015. They actually went above the state requirements in requiring a solar and EV capable ordinance for new construction. What that meant is that new construction had to reserve south-facing roof space for future solar, as well as having a large enough panel to accommodate both solar and EV, and putting the conduit space there that's capable of actually future installation with labeling, so the homeowners know that extra barrier has been removed, and it makes it much, much easier for them. From 2015 to 2017, we saw a jump in the EV charge stations. So we actually dedicated an online scope code for it. We try to keep track of our permit time and staff time to those projects. We realized there's significant savings there, so we were able to reduce our permit fees as well. The permit fees went from $285 to $98 because of that online accessibility. That also was helping us remove some of the soft barriers that we spoke about earlier. We are also introducing the battery storage online last year, as well as the board adopting an EV roadmap. The roadmap is the county's internal goal for both short-term and long-term goals in achieving electrification. These ongoing efforts helped us achieve some achievements. Some of the key ones are NACO, CSAC, and SolSmart awards. We also helped OPR in developing some of the guidebooks, as well as the solar app, and like we talked about, the GO-Biz green status. Early on in 2014, 2015, we learned about the Assembly Bill 1236, and our approach was to take the resources that were available, and I really encourage you guys, whoever doesn't have these ordinances and checklists, to look at the samples that were provided. That was a very good starting point for us. For us, since we already had an existing process, we had to codify our existing processes. That was done in 2015, and then later on when we learned about the actual mapping, we realized the mapping relies more heavily on the actual updated guidebook in 2019. So the checklist was mentioned earlier, I won't go into detail with it, but we had to make some internal adjustments to meet that green status. Luckily for us, we already had a codified ordinance in place. The ordinance adopted a streamlined checklist that could be actually amended at staff level, so we didn't have to go back to the board, and we used the streamlined checklist to make those necessary changes. One thing that we did is AB 1236 was written very similar to AB 2188, which was the streamlining efforts for solar. We were able to actually create one checklist for the applicants, and it makes it a one-stop shop for all of them. But our changes were primarily focused in the difference between commercial and residential. AB 1236 didn't make a distinction between the two, but we had to create new processes to be able to accommodate commercial projects, especially like we talked about earlier, administrative approval. Prior to this, we actually had sites that eliminated parking spots for accessibility, those sites have to go through discretionary permitting. So we work with staff to eliminate that and focus in on administrative approval, which really focused in on health and safety and life only concerns without any associations. And we already had an online portal created for residential sites. We had to create a separate path for commercial, which is intake process through email. That email gets assigned to a case manager who actually internally sends it to 6 different departments for review, consolidates those corrections, and gets one complete notice back to the applicant. And all of this is done in the electronic submittal format, complying to AB 1236 and also achieving the green status. So if you aren't green, or if you're red or anything other than that, don't feel bad. You still have plenty of chances to do it. I think when we first looked at the map, we were gray, which is even worse than red, I think. The most important thing that I want to share with you guys is some of the lessons learned. I wish that someone shared this with me a couple of years ago. So what we realized is the building code advances could be behind the advancing technology. Oftentimes building codes happen on a triennial basis every 3 years, and technologies advance every few months. So there might be a gap between staff and inspection knowledge and comfort with these new technologies. There might also be applicants' comfort with doing online permitting. So you might have to have dedicated staff that walks them through that process. At the time when we rolled it out, we were actually getting very few applicants online. We realized that our online platform wasn't as good as the office in terms of brand new office. We had a cafe, we also had Wi-Fi. So these applicants and permit runners may not have vetted the option online. What we had to do is to create a new partnership with the manufacturers and actually the industry itself. This partnership allowed us to have key stakeholders involved in focus groups and learn from them, be as transparent with them as we can be. What we learned through that is to bridge the gap in technology. We should have vendor presentations. So anytime that there's a new product that's out, we actually have the vendors come and present the products to our staff so that staff sees it actually ahead of seeing it in the field with dedicated Q&A sessions. And that single streamlining checklist really helped in pointing applicants to where to look. And beyond anything else, I really encourage everyone to keep a pre-approved list of products. So if you constantly see the same EV charge stations, asking for the listings ahead of time and the code approvals ahead of time can actually streamline that process. You'll create a list and both the internal staff and inspection staff would be comfortable with it. And looking ahead, we want to continue our partnership with other jurisdictions to approach things and approve them regionally. We also want to further leverage our renewable energy and technology champions. The key is to finding your staff internally that are champions of technologies. I love innovation, so I'm always looking for ways to improve our processes, and also look for that same type of companionship in the industry itself. There's a lot of champions out there. It's getting those two to talk to each other and share similar goals that actually produce really good end products. We are also looking for deploying the EV roadmap, like we talked about, both short-term and long-term electrification goals, both for internal accounting operations as well as helping the CALeVIP and other resources for the private sector as well. Next month, we'll come back to the board with a mechanism to introduce a fee waiver program to waive some of the EV requirements that we talked about. So we reduced the fee to 98 and we'll be eliminating them as a trial basis to see if we can help this fledgling industry. What we found was nearly 45% of our greenhouse gas emissions were from the transportation sector. So anything that we can do to help alleviate that would really help both the applicants and us in our greenhouse gas emission. Those are my contacts, and I encourage anyone to reach out to us and also use the resources that were mentioned earlier. We were really fortunate to have the CALeVIP, SANDAG, and CSE resources when we were first looking at this 5 years ago. So I encourage you guys to do the same. And if you have any questions, please contact us. With that, I want to turn it over to Randy from San Diego Gas and Electric.
All right, thanks, Mo. This is Randy Shimka from SDGRE, the local utility here in San Diego. Going to be talking about 2 topics today. Be short and sweet. I think I'm the last presenter between you and the questionnaire, the Q&A time. I'm going to give a program summary on our clean transportation efforts here at SDGRE, and then we're going to talk about the interconnection process for new electric service. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about our clean transportation program updates. Just a little bit of a quick summary here. We have 3 different programs going. The Power Your Drive Extension program has not been approved by the PUC yet, but hopefully after the first of the year, we'll get a decision from the PUC on this program. It is for 2,000 level 2 charging ports that would be aimed at workplaces and at multi-unit dwelling sites. And this is an extension to the original Power Your Drive program, which was very successful and installed quite a number of ports at those same type of sites. And we have a good interest list of customers that are waiting to get some additional level 2 ports on that program. So hopefully we'll get the approval for that after the first of the year. And then the second and the third program are approved and are actually currently accepting customers right now. So the Power Your Drive program for schools, parks, and beaches is approximately 300 level 2 stations and a little over 30 DC fast charging stations at the school, parks, and beach locations. We're currently accepting applications for that. And there's also a Power Your Drive program for fleets. So for the larger vehicles, charging infrastructure would be provided for up to 3,000 medium duty and heavy duty vehicles at about 300 sites. So that's just launching here. And you can get more information from the SDGRE website on these programs or send an email to ev@sdge.com and talk about getting new service. So we've revamped this process not too long ago to try to make it easier. You can actually get into SDGRE by phoning in to the project planning group. Phone number is listed there, or you can use the web pages that are linked there, and I have some screenshots. We're going to be looking at that center red arrow, the apply for service link there, and you can switch to the next page. When you hit the apply for service link, there are two different choices there. One is a change to your existing electric service, and then the one that I have the red arrow on that's probably the most common would be new construction. So this would be if you don't already have a meter set up for EV charging. You probably would want to have a separate meter if you can do it, if it's economical to do, because that would help you in the future when we do electric vehicle rates. We have one electric vehicle rate for commercial customers that is currently being decided by the PUC, and so you'll be in good shape to use that if you have a separate meter for the charging. So new construction, apply now. And so the kind of information that we'll be requesting to help you out with your new electric service request is listed there under number 1. We'll be collecting information about the project, the primary contact, legal contact, the dates, the start, the finish, the site conditions, and what type of service you're going to be requesting from SDGRE, the voltage level, for example, all the details that go into that. Under number 1, we'll be collecting. And then number 2, after you've submitted your request, then we'll work with you to gather all the required documents, all the drawings, the architectural plans, the civil plans, electrical plans, everything that would be associated with that. And then after we get all the information from you, then we will turn all that over to a planner. So your contact with SDGRE will be through a planner, and they will initiate the work, and they will be on the project with the customer all the way through construction and getting it energized. So it used to be in the past that our planners were geographically assigned. So if you had projects that were in different parts of town, you might be working with different planners. But now we assign the project to a planner based on the scope and the complexity of the job. So we have some planners obviously with more experience and some with less experience that do some of the simpler work. And so I think this is a more efficient way to actually handle the jobs. We get them assigned to a planner that can actually carry it out from start to finish and work with you through the construction process, do site visits, answer questions, help you through all the paperwork and so forth. And we hope that that's going to be a more efficient way for people to deal with the utility to get your new electric service built. So that is my summary for getting a new electric service, and I think that's my last slide too, so we can go on and do the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Randy, and thank you to all the presenters for sharing a lot of great information that's hopefully going to help all the attendees as they look to help streamline EV permitting and get more EV charging deployed in the San Diego region. So just a reminder, for the question and answers, it's open for all the presenters, and the presenters you have control of your own mute button, so you can unmute yourself to answer questions. But for the attendees, we're asking for all questions to be submitted using the chat window. And I see a few have come in already, and you can continue to type them into the chat window as you have questions. So the first question was for Kylan, and it's, are there any carrots or sticks that the governor's office is planning on instituting to get the state all green? So I think we all share the goal of getting the state green, but besides the metals, are there any other sticks or carrots that the governor's office is using to help get the state green?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. And just, again, wanted to thank the Center for Sustainable Energy and SANDAG for organizing this wonderful workshop. So, happy to talk about carrots and sticks approach. What we've done is that we are working with the California Energy Commission, that is, that controls the CALeVIP program that the Center for Sustainable Energy administers. So CEC, they're in charge of that program. And what we've done is for new CALeVIP projects starting in the 2021 year. So I know San Diego is getting one, but other parts of California don't have CALeVIP yet. So if you look at it, the program is organized at a regional level. So for other parts of California that are interested in getting CALeVIP, the Energy Commission has made a change to how they determine what county will get the next project. One of the criteria they look at is permit streamlining status. So if you have two counties, competing against each other, if one county is fully streamlined and then the other is not, the streamlined county would get CALeVIP. So that's quite a few state dollars to fund charging station projects. And one of the big reasons for that is a lot of charging station projects that the state had funded or co-funded were being so delayed that we were essentially losing certain state dollars, or it was making projects more expensive. So the state wants to get the best bang for its buck, that this topic is being factored into future CALeVIP funding, but also just in general, this has become a more and more well-known topic at the state level. There's a lot more energy about this, and that potential changes could come in the future, but that's the only one we have here in terms of a stick. And then in terms of carrots, we again have awards we issue to folks through our office called SEVI Awards, and it looks great to be green on the map. And I can also just talk from experience is that when charging station companies, especially the smaller ones, are thinking about what city to put in a charging station, they will look at this map. They think it will provide some insights on what their experience will be. A green jurisdiction will likely be a better experience versus a red. So if you want to make your city more friendly to this investment, I would definitely recommend getting to green, working with our office, working with the Center for Sustainable Energy to get that ranking.
Great, thank you for that, Kylan. So the next question we have is for Ida and DSA, and the question is, are EV chargers installed in city facilities such as parking lots subject to the CBC Title 11, which I think Chapter 11 accessibility requirements?
If they are installed in city facilities, yes, there's no exception. Chapter 11B applies to publicly owned facilities, as well as public accommodations, commercial facilities, and public housing. So yes, the requirements, if they are open to the public, if they don't meet the requirements for the exception, which means that they are not open to the public and they're fleet vehicles, then accessibility does need to be provided.
Okay, thank you. The fleet exception is definitely a good one to note, because I know the County of San Diego, the City of San Diego, and many of the jurisdictions are looking at fleet charging. So that would be an exception, but any other public facility would need to meet those accessibility requirements. Just a reminder for everybody, please submit questions in the question box that should be on your toolbar, and we will have these slides and a recording made available after the webinar, and you can also follow up with the resources. So I know especially with the accessibility requirements, there's a lot of detail and nuance there that you'll be able to dig into these slides after the presentation. So we do have another question for Kylan, and which I think is related to, you mentioned kind of the workforce and economic development benefits of EV charging, but the question is, any discussion on suspending prevailing wage requirements for local governments to make the installation costs more feasible?
Right now, we don't have any guidance on that point. That's a useful thing to, pay attention to. And our office is very well versed in the economic development component of permit streamlining and charging stations. That's why this division of permit streamlining is in GO-Biz. It's viewed as an economic development opportunity beyond this, like the state, phasing out internal combustion engines. While that's great for the environment, it's a tremendous economic development opportunity in California. We have, I believe, 35 or around there electric vehicle companies, OEMs that are they're small, but we have a large one, Tesla. In our state, we have many more coming online. So regarding the specifics of this question, I can follow up later because I don't have any guidance for you now, but just in terms of the importance of this, just by all the charging station companies in California, all of the new OEMs coming online, this is an amazing economic development opportunity. And our office is happy to help act as an acupuncturist to figure out what are the problems that exist within any problems that might come up in terms of wages and ensuring that folks are getting the help they need. And just ensuring that these are high road jobs that are long-term California-based jobs that support economic development in the state.
Great, thank you, Kylan. So the next question could be for any of the presenters, but maybe we could hear from Mo or Randy first. And it's with the new California ZEV requirement of 100% ZEV new car sales by 2035, do you anticipate any policy changes at the local, state, or utility level? So I know that's asking folks to think a little bit about the future, but Mo, do you see anything more changing from the county level?
Definitely. So we expect a larger volume of EV charge stations, and in particular for the existing homes that are going to be transferring to it. So we're, like I said before, we're doing everything we can to automate that process by putting everything online and having our inspectors and our staff as familiar as they can be with all the various versions of them, whether it's level 1, level 2, or level 3, so that we can streamline that process. But yeah, we do foresee that volume growing as we move towards the future, and we're doing what we can to be able to anticipate that load by automation.
Great, thank you, Mo. And Randy, you definitely referenced some programs yet to be approved by the PUC, but are there other changes you see SDGRE making to continue to work towards this 100% zero emission vehicle future?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think that we're already on a path to see increased vehicles in the state and our region. Maybe it's kind of an affirmation that the pathway is, going to develop and that we're going to see it. But we have our clean transportation dedicated group that I've been a part of since 2011, and we work really closely with other groups that are in the company, infrastructure groups. And so I think that we are definitely making plans to be able to handle the charging of more cars. I think you'll see more programs from us in the future, more specialized rates to incentivize charging at the right time of the day. So I think we're on track to meet that goal.
Hey, Kevin, this is Kylan. I'll just add one other point on this. As part of the executive order, the governor's office has instructed GO-Biz to develop a zero emission vehicle market development strategy, which is a updated version essentially of the zero emission vehicle action plans during the Brown administration. So essentially this document will outline how all of the many state agencies and departments work together to achieve our zero emission vehicle goals. So this is a document that we're putting together, which will ensure transparency and collaboration of all the departments, and it will include information on what civil society, what the industry will do to contribute towards the goal. So it's a master plan of sorts to show all the coordination going on. So that will be released at the end of January, and it will be a helpful document to explain to folks what's going on and ensuring that all agencies and California works to achieve our goal. So that's a document that will be released soon that'll provide a lot of clarity on how we, in terms of your question, achieve those goals.
Great, thank you for that. And as a reminder, we can take more questions in the question box if folks have them, and if we aren't able to answer them on the webinar today, we can try to follow up individually. So we did get another question in. Looks like it's directed at Mo. And it says, do you use an electronic signature software for EV permitting? Are there requirements for electronic signatures? So how does the signature requirement work with your online permitting process?
Thank you for that question. So we basically have an acknowledgement statement that's built into the online platform. So all of the acknowledgements that the applicants are making, it's basically the same format as if you filled out a building permit application in our office. So we do accept those online, and the applicant acknowledges that and signs off on it before they're allowed to go to the next step of actually submitting it. But when it comes to the plans, by the state law, we're allowed, and in fact, we're required to accept electronic signatures when it comes to engineers' designs, so we are complying to that as well. So basically, in the platform that we created online, we were able to take what we needed in our in-office format and our in-office processes and duplicate it online.
Great, thank you for that. And I will make a personal vouch that it's great to do things online, but the County Operations Center does have EV charging stations at the office for anyone who's coming to Kearney Mesa to drop off a plan set, or if they have business there in person.
Thank you for that kind plug.
Yeah, and those were actually funded in an earlier not CALeVIP, but an earlier California Energy Commission grant funded, and I'm always happy to use those stations whenever I ever come to the county. Okay, so we've got another question about parking minimums, which could be for Ida or Kylan or maybe Mo. It says, anyway, parking minimum regulations can be eliminated for EV installations. I ask because when installing DC fast charging stations, existing parking stalls are needed for utility equipment and supporting equipment such as switchgear, power units, and backup battery systems. 3 to 4 parking spaces are often needed for this equipment, and sometimes this requirement exceeds parking minimums. So basically just asking about how parking minimums can be eliminated or waived when you need to repurpose some parking spaces for some of that charging support equipment.
So I guess this is Ida. I'm a little unclear on the parking minimums because there's no state requirement for, I guess I should say, state law requires you to allows you to replace parking with charging with parking. So it does relax those parking minimums. There are no minimums for the minimum amount of electric vehicle charging stations you need to install for existing facilities at this time, unless there's a local requirement. Cal Green for new facilities does state a minimum requirement, but there isn't something for existing facilities, and state law that was passed last year does relax requirements for zoning requirements, I believe, to substitute charging for parking. Did that answer the question?
And that change made, and this is Kylan, that change made to parking requirements with charging stations is AB 1100. So if you're confused at all, the details of that law are just all online.
This is Mo. As a part of our EV roadmap, we're actually looking at potentially incentivizing the ability to put in the EV charge stations, and we're eliminating one parking spot would actually equate to more than just one. So maybe a credit between 3 and 5. So somewhere down the line, we'll actually have that in the future. But I think exactly what you guys talked about already, when you're putting in EV, it shouldn't be counted against the parking spot.
Great, thank you. And I can definitely think of some installations around the region where, especially with the DC, where you've got bigger power cabinets and things like that, where it has taken a parking spot for some of that equipment. But it sounds like it's up to the local jurisdictions to accept that with the guidance in that state law. So one more question for Randy from SDGRE is, how long does a typical new service request take to complete? Obviously, we saw there's a couple steps in there, but is there a general timeline it takes?
Boy, that is a good question. I don't have, from the planning group, I don't have an average quote from them. It really does depend on the complexity of the job and getting all of the documentation put together to move forward. I've seen jobs go fairly quickly, on the order of a few weeks, but I've also seen jobs that take 6 months. So I don't know that I really have an average to quote, but yeah, the better that the customer can be prepared with all of the documentation and the drawings, the better chance I think they have of, meeting up with the planner and really getting off to a good start and launching the program. I can make an inquiry, and if you're going to send out a communication about this after the fact, I can try to get some numbers from the planning group.
Yes, so we will send up a follow-up email with this reporting. So if we do have an answer to that, that would be great. But I think the advice to be prepared as early as possible is great advice. And I don't see any other questions that we can answer at this time. I will thank everyone again for attending and remind them that we will send these presentations out. Important date is October 27th, which is the launch of the CALeVIP program. So if your city is interested in participating, or you work with property owners or developers that would be interested in incentives, you can let them know about this program. In other regions, those incentives have gone fairly fast, so we encourage folks to be prepared. And again, there's technical assistance available for potential site hosts who want to install charging, as well as the one-on-one assistance that we can give to AHJs, cities, and other jurisdictions on their permitting process. And with that, if there's any other final comments from the presenters, we're welcome to have those. Otherwise, we can sign off for this morning's webinar.
Great, yeah, this is Kylan from GO-Biz. Just wanted to thank everyone for participating in this workshop. Really wanted to thank the Center for Sustainable Energy and SANDAG, and yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and happy to answer any questions about permit streamlining offline.
Great, and you see on your slide some contact info for CALeVIP, and we definitely encourage folks to get in touch with any of us for any final questions. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you all for attending.